invite you all to watch and subscribe to the Wasi History channel, which gives information about the history and life.
Hi there. I welcome you to today's lessons. Before we begin with today's lesson, I would urge you to subscribe to the channel and also recommend it to your friends. Today we are going to look at colonial rule in West Africa, and this topic is actually one of the most important topics in history for all WASI candidates in the 4 West African countries. What do I mean by this? What this means is that this topic, colonial rule in West Africa, it is an objective topic or objective test, and students are supposed to or are going to answer 5 questions on this particular topic in all the 4 West African countries that write the WASI examination. And so I would urge you to be very conscious about this topic and also take it very seriously. Good. So let's begin with our lesson objectives. Yes, so the topic is colonial rule. So that's the broad topic. And the colonial rule in West Africa, we will look at that of the British colonial policies in their West African dominions. So in their colonies, what were the British, colonial policies? And that's what we will look at today. In subsequent videos, we will be looking at that of the French and also the Portuguese, of course, colonial policies in their colonies in West Africa. So let's begin with our lesson objectives for today. So our lesson objectives for today will be that by the end of this lesson, you should be able to identify the British colonial policies in West Africa. Okay, so what were some of the colonial policies and the rationale behind some of these colonial policies that we will be looking at? And so this is basically going to be our lesson objectives. And like I said, this is an objective topic, and therefore questions will be asked on the most intricate parts. So the names, the colonies, the names of the policies, how an objective question is set. So you should pay attention to every detail in this lecture. Good. So with that said, let's go into our introduction to the topic. Now, this topic is a continuation of the partition of West Africa, and so I would urge you, if you have not watched the video on the partition of West Africa, I have added a link in the description so that you can go and watch that video or that lesson, so that you can be able to really understand the issues going on here. Now, it was the partition of Africa, or the Berlin Conference, which resulted as a result of the partition of Africa, that led to the eventual colonization of the West African people, or of West Africa, or Africa in general. And so in the partitioning of Africa, where the various European powers decided to scramble for lands in Africa, which was eventually, leading to war, Otto von Bismarck, the German chancellor at that time, had to intervene in order to stop any conflict that was about to, take place among the various European countries. And therefore, he called all the European countries in Berlin to actually discuss, to formalize, or to have a peaceful way of partitioning or sharing Africa among themselves. And so after that Berlin Conference, all the Europeans now knew the methods, the formal way of acquiring territories in West Africa or in Africa. And therefore, we are seeing that the Berlin Conference actually set the stage for the eventual European military invasion and the conquest of West Africa. So after the Berlin Conference, there was one agreement or act which says, or which talks about effective occupation, that colonial powers or European nations should not set colonies in name only. They should actually occupy that territory before it will be regarded as theirs, right? And so because of that, in order to do so, they had to resort to violence, military, on the various group of African people who actually resisted colonial rule. So in most of the wars, Africans fought back, like the Asantes, for instance, in modern day Ghana. They fought back the Europeans on several wars. The last of them was the 1900, the Asantwa War, which actually they were not successful. Some other countries, in some other people also fought against the British, conquest, but that did not happen. It did not take place because the British were, victorious in all the wars. And so the British eventually acquired 4 territories in West Africa. So in West Africa, the British had only 4 colonies, and they were Ghana, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, and the Gambia. These were the 4 colonies for the British, and they can ask you a question on this just to trick you: which among these colonial powers which among these countries was not a colony of Britain? So you should take notice of that. Only 4. Now Germany, on the other hand, also acquired Togoland and Cameroon. So before the First World War, 1914, Germany had Togoland and Cameroon. So they can ask you the 2 German colonies in West Africa, they had Togoland and Cameroon. But later, they lost these 2 colonies to France and Britain, and we will look at that in our next chapter. Now, Portugal, on the other hand, also had Guinea-Bissau and the island of Cape Verde. So Guinea-Bissau and the island of Cape Verde were also taken by Portugal. And then, France, among all the European countries, it was France that acquired the lion's share of the colonies in West Africa. So if you look at the countries that the European powers that I have mentioned here, you realize that France had the lion's share or majority or large area of the West African land, and they had Benin, Burkina Faso, Cote d'Ivoire, Guinea, Mali, Mauritania, Niger, and Senegal. So these were the colonies that the French had in West Africa. And an objective question could be that which among the following European countries actually had the lion's share in or during the partitioning, and that is France. Good. Now let's go into the British, colonial policies in West Africa. Now, during the 19th century, the British colonial policy in West Africa was a policy of assimilation. And, assimilation in the sense that the grand plan of this assimilation policy was to actually, assimilate Africans into the European civilization and culture. So this policy will create a Western class of black Englishmen, and they were known as the Creoles, that's the highest among them, who were supposedly to be the British partners in religion, trade, and administration. So they work hand in hand with the British in these areas: religion, trade, and also administration. Now, these colonies, these African British men rose in some of the colonies, some of where the British presence were, in Freetown, in Bathurst, in South Africa, in southern Ghana, and in Lagos. And these people were important in areas like the churches, the commercial firms, and the colonial administration. So you see, the whole idea of the assimilation was based, or the rationale behind this assimilation was based on the fact that Africans were backward, West Africans were inferior to that of the Europeans, their culture, their way of life, everything about them, their names, their system of marriage, their naming ceremony, their food, their music, their everything, their clothing, language, everything about them was considered by the European or by the British as barbaric, which we have all seen that what the Europeans considered about us as barbaric was not so, and it is not so. And so because of that, they sought to make us, they sought to Europeanize Africans. They sought to Europeanize West Africans to make West Africans look like a European. So as I will always say, an African man in suit. So you are a black man, you are an African man, but your mindset, your attitudes, your behavior, your language, your everything about you is European. And the effect of this is wide. I can't go there because it will take a lot of our time, right? So let me just end there. But that was the idea about this whole assimilation policy, right? And the more you could write, speak the language, behave in a British way, then they would employ you to be in both administration or in religion, being church. They will appoint you to be a pastor or a bishop or something of that sort, trade, administration, and all of that. Good. So, but you see, the whole thing too was that as they were trying to Europeanize Africans, as people would always say that a decorated monkey will still be what? A decorated monkey. You can't change that. And that was also a problem. Racism, they then came to see Africans as not equal to them. And so they began to fill those positions which was, of course, previously held by the Africans. They decided to give it to the Europeans. But these Europeans were also not willing to come to come to West Africa because of the nature of the climate, all right? They were not willing to come. And so there was a problem of the shortage of personnel for the British colonial administration. And therefore, they adopted a policy known as the indirect rule. And in this indirect rule, they were to rule the people through their chiefs. So instead of, if British officials are not coming because of the weather condition here, then we are going to rule the people through their chiefs. And this system is also a whole topic on its own, which we will look at in our subsequent lessons. So indirect rule was the brainchild of Lord Lugard, and Lord Lugard was actually a governor in Nigeria, and he presented the principles of this indirect rule in his book known as the Dual Mandate in Tropical Africa. And he advocated that the first principle of indirect rule was to decentralize the system, which then means that it sought to stress importance on recognizing and ruling the people through their indigenous authority. So let's, decentralize the whole, of course, process. Let's bring power down to the people. So we rule them through their chiefs. Again, the second principle was that of the principle of continuity, whereby we should not destroy what is already, established, because they realized that the African had a well-planned, structured political administration which was already in place, and so they did not want to destroy that. And this is one thing I like about the British indirect rule, in the sense that they preserved the powers of the chiefs, even though in some instances they were a mere puppet, but they did not destroy it, as we will look at in the French administration. So they started to use this of course policy in northern Nigeria, which worked quite well, and so they brought it to the Europeans as well, to the Gold Coast. Now let's look at the structure, the hierarchical, the political structure in West African Dominion. So what happened was that the British set up a separate administrative machines for each of the colonies. So each of the colonies had a separate administration, which means that there was a governor in each of the colonies. So the colony of Gold Coast had a governor, the colony of Nigeria had a governor, the colony of Gambia had a governor. So the colonial governor was in charge of everything, at the head of the colony. But he was responsible to the Secretary of State, who was in London at the colonial office. Now, the colonial governor did not rule alone. but he was, he ruled the colony partly with some legislative council and some executive councils who were appointed later on. And most of the laws of the colony were drawn up by the government and by his of course, council. Again, each of the colony was divided into regional or chief administrators or chief districts, chief administrators or regions. Now, the regions were then divided into provinces, which were controlled by the provincial commissioners, and each province was also divided into districts under the leadership of a district commissioner. And each, of course, district was divided into one or more traditional states. That is where the traditional rulers were supposed to rule directly with the people. So you realize that in the indirect rule system, the traditional, leaders were actually, they were the ones who were in touch with the people. And this is not different like what we have today. Today we have regional ministers, we have MCs, as municipal chief executives or district executives. It goes down to that of the assemblyman. And so that is basically what the British decided to do. Good. I hope you have had a nice time today. I'm particularly happy about today's lesson. So thank you very much for your time, and I hope to see you some other time, that you subscribe to the channel. Thank you.
Wasi TV, first of all, equal.